do. A deer, a female deer, red, a drop of golden sun. Me, a name I call myself, far, a long way to run. So, a needle pulling thread, line, a note to follow. So, tea, a drink with jam and bread that will bring us back to do.
Do, re, mi, fa,
So, la, ti, do, ti,
fa, so, fa, mi, re, do, mi,
so,
re, fa,
la, ti, ti, do.
mi, so, re, fa,
La, ti, ti.
When
You know the notes to sing, you can sing most anything. A doe, a deer, a female deer, ray, a drop of golden sun. Me, a name I call myself, pa, a long, long way to run. So, a needle pulling thread, la, a note to follow. So, tea, a drink with jam and bread that will bring us back to so, do, ra, fa, mi, do, re. So, do, la, fa, ti, la, so, fa, ti, do.
Oh, you know, we should talk a little bit about pitch, motive, and melody. Pitches are just those discrete little ups and downs, right? Throw a couple of ups and downs together, a couple of pitches together in maybe a characteristic rhythm, and you might have what's known as a motive, if it's very short, or a phrase, if it's slightly longer. And then put a couple of motives and phrases together and you would have a full-fledged melody. And we've already batted around those terms, and sorry I haven't defined them until now. But you might have noticed that in each phrase or subsection of the melody of the Do-Re-Mi song from The Sound of Music, we started on the next up ensuing pitch, and it was Do, Re, Mi, etc. Richard Rodgers' song is, as far as I know, the second melody song in music history to use these do-re-mi syllables, which come down to us as the solfege syllables. They were invented by a guy named Guido of Arezzo about 1,000 years ago. And his attitude in the Middle Ages, when, at least in the early to mid-Middle Ages, when creativity was not encouraged, in fact, almost downright frowned upon, he bought into tradition and he pretended to not, this is as far as we can determine, he pretended to not have composed that piece, but instead he said, hey, look what I found. It sounds like this. And notice those are basically the same syllables we had in the Do-Re-Mi song. The only difference, oot. Who wants to sing oot? Do you want to sing oot? I don't want to sing oot. Oot actually was replaced by do from another system of syllables representing notes. And do was actually short for domine, which in Latin means God. And I think it's kind of cool that the key note, the tonic, the lowest note of the scale, is the God note. Yeah. And then oot, re, mi, fa, sol, la. And notice he never gets up to T. And indeed, in Europe and many other places in the world, the seventh degree is not T, but C. And that's caused all sorts of problems, but whatever. And you might have noticed that when they sang that do-re-mi song, the hymn to St. John, by the way, their oot or their do was in a different place than we are here. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And so Guido was using what we would call today movable do. Do is defined as the lowest note of any scale collection. Because the Solfege syllables are Latin cognates, Latin syllables, they're spelled differently than in English. So you've got do, D-O, re, R-E, not R-A-Y, which is the way it's spelled in the do-re-mi song from Sound of Music, but whatever. And then the killer, mi, M-I. We're going to actually use the syllable may, but that would be the M-E. Ay, ay, ay. Fa, not so bad, F-A. Sol is so, S-O-L, out of luck. And many people pronounce it soul, soul or so. In the Richard Rogers song, of course, it's so, a needle pulling thread, it's not soul, some good food, whatever. Why do people pronounce it so? My speculation is people who saw it, or who said it rather than saw it, and do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, they just elided it. So I will accept spelling it either way, S-O-L or just S-O. Fine by me. And then la, not too bad, just like fa, and T, just like me, well, in terms of the vowel I, T-I. That's it. Or is it? So here's Guido's total range of notes for his male singers in a choir. And his lowest note for the group is this low G, which is pretty low. And that would be his ut, re, mi, fa, sol, la, which corresponds to G, A, B, C, D, E. He also had this movable thing. He had his ut here, and ut, re, mi, fa, sol, la. Here's where it gets, oh, and we're in a clef called bass clef. And that is a stylized F. And we should get that for you too, just so you can see it. Like the G clef, it's radically transmogrified itself over the years, from a literal F to the F with those dangerously starting to curve lines, and then notice even more curved lines, and the crossbars have degenerated to two dots on either side of that line instead of both above, and now it looks like that. Amazing, but we still have the two dots in the original. You might notice when a scale begins on this F as another ut. Ut, re, mi, fa. The fa actually is a funny looking B with a little symbol in front of it. And that was, well, in its day it was called the B rotundum, the round B, as opposed to that slightly higher F, G, A, B, which they then called the B quadratum, or hard B. This was all developed in Arezzo, Italy. Something happened to that hard B, that squared off B, when it went over the Alps. Must have been the snow. Check this out. The bottom part got erased. It's called H, north of the Alps. And to this day, the Germans will still designate what we call B natural as H. And that soft B is what we now call the B flat. On a piano, well, let's just look at the old piano, shall we? There's what we call the hard B, and here is the soft B. And you notice that's one of those black notes. And we now call this, hey, what happens when your tire blows out on the freeway? Oops, the tire got a puncture. What happens to the car? It's a flat tire. The car goes down. And what happens if you step on something sharp and pointy? Ooh! You're going to go up. So sharp up, flat down. So the original soft B just meant a lowered B, and the original hard B meant a relatively higher B. But this has been abstracted over the years so that the low one is now called the flat sign, and it can precede any note, meaning that that note is lowered a half step. And similarly, let's get that up, The natural sign, which, as you can see, there's been a little bit of an additional line down on the right-hand side, now is sort of the default note for any note to correct the fact that it was lowered and now it has been raised. Well, that raised and lowered, eventually people ran with that and came up with yet an even higher sign, and that would be the sharp sign. And so any note, notice, can, and this is where the black notes come in terms of naming them. So this black note can be named E flat or now D sharp. And just one more fun fact in terms of that hard and soft B and that notion that the Germans use the letter H to mean B. Check this out. Johann Sebastian Bach was even able to symbolize his name in music. And that would be the soft B, which we call B flat. B, A, and then C, C, and then the hard B, B natural. It's kind of a creepy, half-steppy collection, is it not? And he uses that as the third subject of a very complex piece, a triple fugue, and we'll talk about those things later. This is towards the end of his life in a composition called The Art of Fugue. He introduces several other themes, several other melodies. They overlap on top of each other, and then when he introduces that third theme, he dies. The moral of the story is, don't get cocky. There's Bach, by the way, in a relatively early depiction. The Russian composer Shostakovich, Bach is German, by the way, also used this technique of basically making a word out of musical letter names. It's called Sojeta Kavata, the carved subject. Later in his life, he felt he was quite oppressed by the Soviet Union's tyranny, and so he came up with the notion of putting a little secret code of his own name in his music. Dmitri, D. And then Shostakovich. The Germans so happen to call E flat, which by the way is me, me, M-E for May. Isn't that confusing? The Germans can sometimes call this Esch, so that would be like Shostakovich. And speak about the Germans, Shostakovich's name is Russian, and so he would have spelled it with the Cyrillic alphabet, which looks vaguely like the Greek alphabet because, of course, the Greek influence going up the Volga River et al. Long time ago. But when one transliterates, substitutes the Cyrillic letters for Roman letters, sometimes it happens one way and sometimes it happens another. So Shostakovich in British and American transliteration, probably also French, is S-H-O, etc. But in German, it's S-C-H-O. So here's the Esh, C, H. There it is. So D, S, C, H. And he put that in his music several times, I think simply to thumb his nose at the authorities. Ba 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 ba. I'm still here, even in this totalitarian land. Okay, so I think we're ready for a final blitz through Richard Strauss's Also sprach Zarathustra introduction. We've looked at it as the music for a film, then seen a live performance with instruments. Now we're looking at the score. This is what the conductor, the leader of the big group of instruments, the orchestra, would see. And it includes all the written parts for the instruments. And let's take some close-ups, shall we?